I think that Testify suffers from something. I think the issue is the production, but it's not Phil's fault. And it's not even really the fault of the era. And I don't even think it's a permanent problem. It could be a temporary problem. You see, the tools that Phil was using at the turn of the century in the early 2000s were early digital tools, digital recording tools, digital drum machines, digital synthesizers. These are tools that really are not in vogue anymore. They didn't last very long. They were quickly replaced. And then within the next 10 years, people would be going back to the analog instruments that Phil used on his first record. But that doesn't mean that instruments that are dated won't be in vogue again, because I really like both sides. Both sides has got these like classic early 90s pianos, which I really like now. And of course, we know that to be true about the 80s music, like gated reverb drums and the DX7 and the Prophet synthesizers. Those are all super popular and super expensive to get your hands on now. But I can't say the same about the early 2000s. And I think most of Testify gets away with it, but there are some tracks where the instrumentation just sounds a little thin, especially when you compare it to earlier stuff. So let's talk about Wake Up Call, the first song off of the album Testify, which came out in 2003. And this was the third or fourth single, depending on how you're counting, from the album. So we had Can't Stop Loving You, which did really well. I think it went to number 1 on the Billboard Top 100 adult contemporary charts. Come With Me, which I love, also did really well. I think it went to 16 or 18 or so. This song was sort of paired with Least You Can Do. Least You Can Do, I think I put in my top 10 Phil songs of all time. I certainly would put Can't Stop Loving You in my top 10 Phil songs. So Come With Me, Can't Stop Loving You, The Least You Can Do. I'm a huge Testify fan, so I am going to speak ill a little bit about Wake Up Call, but that's because I am a big fan of Testify. I just don't think that Wake Up Call really feels that great, especially if you compare it to like Hanging Long Enough, which I know isn't fair, or Sue Studio, which one of my friends in our new Patreon gave some feedback. By the way, if you haven't joined our Patreon, you have to join, because I will give a little heads up about what the next song review is, and then anybody on our Patreon can just like give their comments, which I'll include in this video. But my friend John from Patreon really compares it to Hanging Long Enough, Sue Studio. I have to agree. Even a little earlier with songs like Dance Into the Light. This song just sounds a little thin. It's just not too great of an opening track. When the bass kicks in, and again, bass is not the bass pattern. I don't really enjoy too much. I think my biggest problem is the drum machine synthesizers. Again, that works completely in both sides. I really love it. I don't know why it just kind of irks me a little bit in Testify. I totally leave the possibility for down the road when this type of early 2000s instrumentation is popular and everyone's trying to get their hands on these early digital keyboards. Maybe take us back to early 2000s, because everyone had listened to Tarzan, and that was massive and so good. And then we heard Can't Stop Loving You, which was so beautiful. I mean, I think I like Can't Stop Loving You better than anything on Tarzan, and I really like Tarzan. So when I heard Can't Stop Loving You, I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be a great record. So I think I was a modicum disappointed when I heard Wake Up Call, even though the album redeems itself. And I think some of Phil's best songs are on this record. I know he really likes this record, and I'm a big fan of both sides. This is he would kind of compare this to both sides in the sense that he did a lot of it himself. I think there's some like criminally underrated songs on this record. We'll talk about other days. We have talked about Least You Can Do, Through My Eyes. I think the biggest thing I like about this song is it's tied to nostalgia, right? We go back to what we talked about the opening track. Hearing Can't Stop Loving You on the radio, I was really excited to hear this album, and I went and bought it. And this is actually the only Phil Collins album, like studio album, that I bought the day it came out. I mean, I think going back as well. That's because when the other records came out, I was just like too young, or it just wasn't of the era to go into a record store. So this, I actually went to a record store. Actually, scratch that. It was Best Buy. Remember back in those days when you'd buy CDs from Best Buy because they were the cheapest way to get CDs. Anyway, I did go to Best Buy this day to get this record. I think I was a little disappointed in this early song, even just like the early, because it's kind of high passed, right? The first few bars of the song doesn't have the bass or the real drums, and it just feels a little thin. I think it's a weak way to open the record, and I think it's one of the weaker songs on the record. I know Phil is keen on this song. That's why he included it on the archives with Genesis. I know it was a single. I talked about this song when I did my top 5 least favorite Phil Collins songs. I don't know if I would still put it in my top 5. Just because I'm so nostalgic for it, because it reminds me of that day when a new Phil Collins record came out in the 2000s, and having that feeling of this is new Phil Collins music. I really took that for granted. I didn't know I would never have that feeling ever again. Maybe a little bit with Brother Bear, but what I would give to go to a record store on release day and to pick up a new Phil Collins record. So that's kind of why I like Wake Up Call, is it reminds me of that feeling. By the way, we just did a review, or we just did a little video that kind of went viral about Chester Thompson's new album, which is called Wake Up Call. But there's no relation. I mean, there might be some inspiration. I'd have to ask Chester, but the songs are completely different. Although they both kind of feature like alarm clock sounds in the background. Also, a shout out to another patron, Sean, who said that talking about songs like this really inspire us to go back and listen to the record. In fact, Sean mentioned about this song being one of his favorites on this album and the rest of the album not really doing it for him. So that's kind of interesting, right? I feel the opposite. I feel like Come With Me and Can't Stop Loving You and Through My Eyes and It's Not Too Late, Swing Low. There's so many great tracks on this song, on this record. But for me, it's not. But that's what I love about this channel, right? I say that there's a certain song I don't like and everyone's like, that's my favorite song. And then everyone's like, oh, I would cut these two songs from We Can't Dance. I'm like, hold on, those are my two favorite songs. So I love that. I love that diversity about this channel and about being a fan of Phil and of Genesis. Anyway, let me know what you think about Wake Up Call. I have a lot of reasons why I really like it and a lot of reasons why I don't care for it too much. I don't want to get into the fact about like when this came out, the fact that Phil was no longer a mega pop star as he was when No Jacket Required came out or when But Seriously came out. A lot of people were, even by the time this record came out, people were moving away from grunge. It was now boy bands and Christina Aguilera and Britney Spears. And so I won't even get into that whole era and how Phil was kind of rejected during this time. I think it's an absolute triumph that Can't Stop Loving You came out on top, despite everything working against him. But anyway, that's enough. That's enough. Let me know what you think about Wake Up Call. Do you like it? Do you love it? Let me know. Come on over and join our Patreon so you can have some input on future episodes.